From 93 million miles away, our sun looks like a pretty simple, steady ball of light, right? But for decades, scientists have known that's just an illusion. Up close, our star has been hiding this huge magnetic mystery, a paradox that honestly seemed to break the laws of physics. And just recently, a team of researchers finally cracked the code. And really, the whole mystery boils down to this one question. How does the wild, chaotic, tangled up magnetic field we see on the sun's surface somehow transform into the calm, elegant, almost serene structure we see in its outer atmosphere? I mean, they look like they come from two completely different stars. And this just shows you the problem perfectly. On the left, you've got the photosphere, that's the sun's visible surface, and it is just covered in these intense, super complex magnetic storms we call sunspots. But then, on the right, you have the corona, the sun's wispy outer atmosphere, and it's defined by these vast, simple, gracefully curved magnetic field lines. It's a complete personality switch. So, to understand what's going on, we first need to really appreciate these two completely different faces of our star.
Okay, think of the photosphere as a boiling sea of plasma. It is a place of constant turmoil where these small-scale, violent magnetic fields tied to sunspots just completely dominate the landscape. But then, in stark contrast, the global corona evolves so slowly, almost majestically. It's not shaped by those tiny little storms, but by these enormous, simple magnetic structures that can last for months. So the big question is, why isn't the corona just as chaotic as the surface right below it?
To find the answer, scientists needed a very special tool, a way to take the sun's magnetic fingerprint and break it down into its most fundamental parts. That tool is called spherical harmonic decomposition. Now, I know that sounds super complicated, but the idea behind it is actually beautiful. Think of the sun's magnetic field like a complex chord being played by a giant orchestra. This mathematical technique is like having a perfect ear that allows scientists to isolate each individual instrument, from the deep, simple rumble of the bass all the way to the frantic, high-pitched notes of the flute. And this is basically what those magnetic notes look like. The simple patterns, which scientists give a low number L, represent those huge, global-scale magnetic structures. You can think of them as the sun's deep bass notes. Then, the really complex patterns with the high L values, those represent the high-pitched details, all the small, tangled magnetic fields created by every single sunspot. So, with this incredible method in hand, researchers analyzed data from an entire 11-year solar cycle, all the way from 2009 to 2020. They broke down the sun's magnetic field for every single month, listening, in a sense, for which of those notes were the loudest. And what they found, well, it completely changes how we think about the sun. Let's take a look at the clues they uncovered. First, just look at the sun with your own eyes. On the left, we've got solar minimum. It's pretty quiet, relatively calm. On the right, solar maximum. It's buzzing with sunspots. You would assume the magnetic music would be completely different, right? Like a quiet hum versus a loud, chaotic symphony. But now look at this. These charts show the magnetic power of each one of those notes. And here's the big surprise. Whether the sun is quiet or chaotic, the charts look almost identical. In both cases, the power is overwhelmingly packed into those first few L values on the far left. The deep, simple bass notes are always the loudest thing in the room. And this wasn't a fluke. They charted this magnetic power for the entire 11-year cycle, and the pattern was just undeniable. Even as the number of sunspots rose and fell dramatically, the core magnetic power, that dark blue band down at the bottom, it stayed locked in those simple, large-scale patterns. The bass is always the dominant instrument. So here's the crucial point. The study found that more than 80% of the sun's total magnetic power comes from these huge, simple, large-scale structures. The tiny, intense sunspots, for all their visual drama, are really just high-pitched details playing way in the background. This discovery is the key to unlocking the corona's big secret. The answer, it turns out, wasn't on the surface, but in the journey upwards. All right, so what happens to all those magnetic notes, the deep bass, and all the high-pitched details as we move away from the sun's surface? So right at the surface, this red line here, which measures the overall magnetic complexity, it basically follows the sunspot cycle, just like we'd expect. More sunspots means more high-pitched details, so the complexity goes up. Make sense? But now, watch what happens. Just a short distance away from the sun, at about 1.5 times its radius, look at that red line. It absolutely plummets. The high-frequency magnetic noise from all those sunspots just fades out incredibly fast with distance. It really is like walking away from an orchestra. The first sounds you lose are the high-pitched flutes.
And by the time we get all the way out into the corona at 2.5 solar radii, almost all of that complexity is just gone. The red line is nearly flat. Only the simplest magnetic shapes, like a basic 2-poled dipole or a 4-poled quadrupole, they're the only ones that survive the journey. This is the big secret. The corona looks so simple because distance itself naturally filters out all the magnetic noise from the surface.
The researchers summed it up perfectly. They said that sunspots have little direct and immediate influence on the quasi-static global coronal field. In other words, for all their sound and fury, the sunspots just can't touch the slow-changing, large-scale structure of the corona. Their influence simply doesn't reach that far. Now, this isn't just a neat piece of solar trivia. This discovery has some really profound implications for how we study our sun and even stars across the entire galaxy. So there are 3 major implications here. First, it makes our models of the sun way more efficient. We now know we can focus on the big picture and still get accurate results, without getting bogged down trying to model every tiny sunspot. Second, it actually validates decades of historical data. You know, all those old, low-resolution solar maps we have? Well, it turns out they were capturing the most important information all along. And third, and this is huge, it changes how we study other stars. We can now use even blurry, low-res data to understand the space weather around distant exoplanets, which is an absolutely critical step in the search for life. So in the end, the sun kind of teaches us this beautiful lesson about complexity. Sometimes, to understand the big picture, you have to learn to ignore the noise. The grand overarching structure is governed by its own simple, powerful rules. It really makes you wonder, if our own star was holding a secret this elegant, what other simple truths are hiding behind the chaos of the cosmos, just waiting for us to find the right way to listen?